everyone. Thank you so much from you, Professor Hoffler, and thanks, KISDi. Nice to see you guys, old friends and old KISDis, and Professor Hoffler after some years. So I'm so happy to back at KISDi after some years. First of all, let me apologize for my poor English. Actually, I'm a good speaker, but the problem is just in my own language. But after that, I would like to dedicate this moment to Michael Erhoff, a great colleague, a great teacher, a wonderful friend, and my maestro, because I had the chance to talk about the topic I want to explain today with him. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to him. Okay. The topic of this KISDtalk is design, activism, and democracy. As Professor Hopper said, just let me to share my screen, sorry. Actually, I compacted 3 sessions or 3 talks just in one talk, but I hope this can work today. Okay. One of the challenges of design studies in the last decade was the role of designers in society and the borders of this role. And subsequently, in last year's discussion that the presence of designers and non-designers, which action exactly is design action and which one is not. In fact, the importance of designers' role problematic during the 60s and 70s under the importance of left-wing thoughts grew and made more questions about the nature of design and designer, particularly after publishing Victor Papan's famous works in 1971, you know this book, Design for the Real World. Many designers wanted to save the world by their own actions and considered themselves strongly responsible for the developments around them. Just a point, I do absolutely not agree with this idea that design is solution to everything and can do everything, or design is the potential of saving the world. No, I'm just talking about this idea or kind of thinking like this in 70s. Before this book in 1969, Herbert Simon in his famous book, The Sciences of the Artificial, argued that design in itself is to devise courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred one. And when we talk about the existing situations, actually it's existing situations of systems and products. From Simon's view, it can be interpreted that design does not exactly mean change, and designers are not activists themselves, but designers conceive courses of action that may serve as a blueprint for others for changing the world. Years later, the Board Act beside design became more meaningful, including in Antwerp works, who has been exploring the activism phenomenon in last years. Thorpe believes that activism starts when groups within society call for change and society responds. She said, I define activism as taking intentional action to instigate a change on behalf of a neglected group. According to Antwerp, design directly borrows techniques from activist practices and develops them further. So the first typicality we can borrow from activism and bring it to design activism is not being passive. Yes, design actions from changing products and systems up to intervention in political and social happenings gradually became part of designer's role. The role that is completed in design activism, where design itself on the ontological conditions can be a form of acting. And this is the second feature of a design activism phenomenon I would like to mention, intervention actually. Samara Koch, in a text called Design and the Question of Eurocentricity, with referring to an Arabic word, tasmim, we have the same word in Persian also, uses the concept of decision maker for designer. Tasmim or design in current usage, however, seems to be based seems to be based on tasking as determining, making up one's mind and resolve to follow up a matter. Thus, in linguistic terms, design is an act of determination, of sorting out possibilities, and of projecting a choice. It has little to do with problem solving. The prevailing paradigm as the designer or musamma means the person who make decision, seems to encounter choices, not problems, and to engage in judging merits, not solving problems. It is closer to decision maker, as I said. So let me borrow the third feature from Samra Kach's definition of design, decision making. But there is an important point here. Mostly the designer is a decision maker with the design process, not so much in the implementation phase. Normal designers cannot even decide whether a proposal is accepted or implemented at all. In fact, this is the client's decision. In better words, Akach says designer is someone who encounters choices, not problems. As for instance, in ordinary design projects, designer has an employer and a consumer or user with a defined problem. And what a designer does is the courses of action to help to solve the problem, while the activist is the person who finds the problems, makes the decision, and implements or acts based on its decisions. Nevertheless, in design activism, the designer itself should find the problem and be a questioner. Therefore, activist designer is a role between being designer and being activist. Sarah Hendren, in Notes on Design Activism, states, design activism uses the language of the design to address, provoke, and create political debate. Instead of solving problems in the matter of industrial design or organizing forms, as in graphic design, activist design might create a series of questions or proposals using artifacts or media for unresolved ends to provoke or question or experiment in search of new political conditions. It might use and enrich different tools located in the field of visual communications, material cultures, or practices. Artifacts is contestation, discourses, and action, not the type effects. So let me add another word, questioning. Questioning and criticism are two sides of the same coin, and in design activism are the characteristics that are intellectual behavior, deep observing, finding problematics, and making changes for people, not just being a cog in the capitalism machine. Thus, looking at design activism as an intellectual work does not seem far-fetched. Edward Said about the definition of an intellectual based on Antonio Gramsci works, the Italian activist, journalist, and brilliant political philosopher, write, first traditional intellectuals such as teachers, priests, and administrators who continue to do the same thing from generation to generation. And second, organic intellectuals who Gramsci saw as directly connected to classes or enterprises that use intellectuals to organize interests, gain more power, get more control. Said concludes that Gramsci believes organic intellectuals are actively involved in society. That is, they constantly struggle to change minds, and unlike teachers and priests who doing the same kind of works year in, year out, organic intellectuals are always on the move, on the make. From this point of view, it can be said that Michelangelo was an organic intellectual when he had changed or transformed a chapel with his art and did an intellectual work. Hence, activist designer, in a sense, can be an organic intellectual. In other terms, activist designer is the same intellectual designer in my work. I use this term to fusion the concept of that intellectual side, as activist designers are those who do perform the intellectual function. is in society from design expertise, such as organic intellectual. So it can be concluded that that in design activism, we have a kind of design intellectualism that could be the professional branch of design activism. Because what is intellectual designer does is to devise courses of action by using design methods and design instruments that make the social and political actions more effective, more efficient, and more successful. If so, the next question would be that how will a normal designer be transformed into an intellectual designer? Can there be a training, a kind of education? The main difference between an ordinary designer and an intellectual designer, from my point of view, or professional activist designer, is creative enlightenment. I'm using the term creative enlightenment because from my perspective, an activist designer or intellectual designer, unlike a normal designer, usually works in an extreme, extraordinary, or not the ordinary atmosphere. As mentioned, this abnormal situation often is the encounter scene of social, political, and or cultural problems. Therefore, at that moment, first, you as an intellectual designer are one person among ordinary people. Second, a creative person at the maximum. And third, an activist designer who is searching for a time to do something as a performative role. Yeah, creative enlightenment can find meaning in the square of being activist and thinking intellectual, being creative, and raised awareness. Yes, a typical designer to find creative enlightenment needs social consciousness, as the consciousness shared by individuals within a society to become an intellectual designer. In other words, from my perspective, we should divide design activism into two main parts. The first one is the intellectualism area I've explained, and I will present a project today in this part. And the second part is the designing citizen phenomenon. I'm not interested to open very much this part because it's a long topic, and my concentrate today is the first part actually. But Professor Wolfgang Yunus wrote a very good text on this topic in design activism, the book you have said. But just as a point, we can follow citizen designers' notion in two levels. First one can be described as non-intentional design, and the second level is using design by ordinary people to send a message and a resistance. Then both are a kind of dialogue with power. So let me to add another word. Design activism is an instrument of dialogue and negotiation between designers and citizens with power or government. And actually, it's a topic I would like to present it on next KISD seminar if my proposal was accepted next November. But just for example, using traffic cones for shocking tear gases, suitcases and umbrellas as shields, and laser pointers for distortion of CCTV cameras, for some cases from Hong Kong protesters' creative actions 2 years ago. The great creative actions in these protests happened, and nothing can stop the protest, just coronavirus. Non-intentional design means to illustrate the everyday redesign of designed objects by users that do not create a new design, but through using an object, create something new or replace the old. In other words, a non-intentional design means things are used for purposes other than they were intended for. You know this topic, but the simple example for that can be a chair. If I hanging my coat from my chair, something that everyone does, actually, it means no chair in the world designed for hanging a coat, but this is the people do. But what about design activism area? In design activism, we have some ordinary design actions of people, but in an extraordinary or unusual complicated cases. For instance, we have the pictures here. For instance, in Idlib, Syria, some people tried to make an improvised gas mask with paper glass and plastic against chemical attacks in September 2018. And, or in Afghanistan, in a small poor village in Mazar Sharif called Ghazalabad, due to the high price of wooden beams, people used remain BM-21 Grad Soviet Union rockets as their house columns and or roof beams. Something dangerous, tragic, and of course still innovative. But let me back to the first part, design intellectualism. In the last 2 years as a design activist, I've worked on design activism and democracy topic and or how design activism can help to expand the democracy in countries. In March of 2017, Ezio Manzini and Victor Margolin, two design thinkers, in an open letter to the design community, asked them to take action and respond to the crisis the democracy is undergoing. They said, we designers are in difficult and dangerous times. For many years, we lived in a world that, despite its problems, was nevertheless committed to principles of democracy in which human rights, fundamental freedoms, and opportunities for personal development were increasing. Today, this picture has changed profoundly. Actually, it was after Brexit in 2016, Donald Trump in US and Marine Le Pen in France. Today, this picture has changed profoundly. There are attacks on democracy in several countries, including those where democracy seems to be unshakable. Margolin and Manzini asked the design community to take action because normal ways of designing were not enough. And the role of designer in confronting the lack of democracy in the world needed to be changed. And thus, it was an invitation to designers for intervention in changing to improvise democracy and its tools. Although considering social issues, design is not a new phenomenon, but intervention in big systems such as social networks, the project I'm working on, and talk about design and democracy relation needs a new disposition in design. This new disposition is about awareness of existing power relationships and at the same time, confidence regarding new skills and capabilities in design. From this point of view, today, design activism is the same new tendency for designers, I can say. In design activism, there is no method that is recommended, and all methods are just instruments to do any positive change, even a small one. Design activism uses the language of design to be a little bit more social, more critical, and more effective in society. Yeah, design and activism are two hands joined together, but there is a point. The river started from design and falls into activism. Therefore, I believe just being activist cannot be enough because we designers can't be more active than activists can. We, as designers, should think deeply and design correct. This correctness is not only about form and function, but also is about consideration of user needs and the moral consequences of our design. And then can use the help of people or activists to implement, or ideas, or vice versa, or our ability to implement people's idea. In this regard, the social network is a great challenge for activist designers as a big project with different aspects of system design, strategy, behavioral design, customer experience, and so on. Obviously, social network as technology would be a great source at the service of democracy if its crisis can be solved. Here, design can be a fantastic tool to help in this regard, because the ability of change is still the most important duty that design can do for societies and users. From my point of view, Therefore, problem solving as the biggest imaginable claim for design is a way to change toward the preferred situation. Now, the social network needs to change and be more democratic. But how? Technology alone can't save democracy. When technology is designed and used well, it can make it easier for people to participate in elections and other activities of civic life. But when it's not, technology that promises to help ends up being harmful. Social networks as a technology and the relation to democracy have been under magnified recently. But here, one of the main questions is whether this virtual world is really democratic and why these digital products were designed in this form. Now I want to talk about my experience in this regard. Actually, the fact is when Facebook saw Mark Zuckerberg and his classmates at Harvard launched Facebook, for example, they wouldn't have imagined the next years of this new platform and dimensions of violence, ethical challenges, its impacts on people's lives and businesses, and also democracy. This is true about other entrepreneurs, developers, and technology leaders too. Zuckerberg and his friends have just targeted the lack of emotions in 21st century life and the weakness of human connections. As humanity means somewhere there are human relations, and they made this virtual location. Thus, the social network was an answer to the need, but almost nobody had an estimation of the future problems that social network could make for people. However, what is meant by social network problems here? Overall, if I want to summarize some of the most important harms of social networks, especially with the emphasis on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as three of the most popular social networks. In that time, I wrote this paper, actually, Clubhouse was not started yet. Okay. As three of the most popular social networks, without priority, we can mention these titles in two groups. First one is the crisis that harm democracy and human rights. Data privacy and digital human rights, fake accounts and false information, and authoritarian inclinations. So it's a long debate, but let me to talk about fake accounts. Okay, about fake accounts, what is important is that all these fake accounts or identities in social networks in future elections can be the most helpful to populist leaders and help to change the direction of the minds and strike a blow at democratic processes. And in second group, we have the crisis that harm people or users. Making money through social networks, that is a big opportunity and also a big threat. Producing violence, become addictive machines, and creation of irrelevance case in societies. About producing violence, the social network now is not only the place of human networking, information development, and growth of knowledge, but also the ideal media for publishing thousands of bullying and hate in daily comments and fantastic media for terrorist groups. Therefore, one of the other crises of the social network today is the generating of violence. This aspect unfortunately grows day by day, and companies are forced to spend a lot of money to control it. The control sometimes works as a kind of censorship. But about creation of irrelevance case in societies. You will know Harari, the Australian historian, believes with the progress of technology, especially in AI and biotechnology, in 2050, we will encounter people who have many things to do, but they are useless and inefficient. It is true about social networks also, as these people will do many things in the social network but generate nothing, and what they do will have no value, while it takes many hours. Digital social networking is one of the most important things that this irrelevance case has to do. Solving the social and economic problems of these people is one of the next year's challenges related to social networks. But what can be the design solution for this change? How it is possible to design and create a safe and democratic social network? It was conventional wisdom to assume that social network would enable greater access to information, facilitate collective organizing, empower civil society, and help democracy to develop, as the social network was conceived as the modern democracy, but this was not the whole story. In other meaning, one big weakness is social networks that was imagined before, which is a positive aspect and now has changed to a big threat to democracy, is reducing the concept of democracy to an instrument of making the opportunity for everyone to comment and talk about everything without expertise. Something now, after some years of experience, the possibility has changed the social network concept to a controlling tool for populist leaders, dictators, and harmed democracy. It seems we need a kind of aristocracy or even technocracy in social networks, something like the Electoral College experience in the US, maybe, and removing the possibility of creating anonymous accounts that help to change users' behavior is an endeavor in this area. In fact, the presence of users with recognized identities could decrease populistic statements and not thoughtful comments. This idea reminds the famous Dewey-Lippmann debate in the US about a century ago. Okay, what I tried to do in this project actually was redefining value. How we can redefine value. When I'm talking about value, actually, it's back to economy. I mean, the same concept as Karl Marx said. I'm not talking about the multidimensional values. As you know, money is a made value. Actually, if we can, the famous example, if we can find some monkeys and want to exchange a paper money with their bananas, none of them accept this trade, actually. But human accept this. Human likes and made these stories. And now Bitcoin is a story. NFT is a story. If we could defining and designing the concept of value, we can solve plenty of problems of social networks. What I'm working on actually is monetization of every action on a platform based on digital coins. When a social phenomenon, because when a social phenomenon become more economical, it will be less immoral. About a century ago, Max Weber, in his famous text, The Protestant Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber wrote that capitalism in Northern Europe evolved when the Protestant, particularly Calvinist, ethic influenced a large numbers of people to engage in work in the secular world, developing their own enterprises and engaging in trade and the accumulation of wealth for investment. In other words, the Protestant work ethic was an important for behind the unplanned and uncoordinated emergence of modern capitalism. Calvinist thought accumulation of wealth for investment, unlike other Christian beliefs, is not an unmoral concept. Okay, what I did actually is a long debate. But here I don't want to present the model completely. in the book I did. Just I want to say in this talk, in fact, is how design activists can go and how is the borders of intervention in a topic be an activist designer. And after 2 years, the result of what I did actually is kind of a prediction. For example, Instagram announces next stages of IGTV monetization, new revenue options for Instagram Live. It happens last year. And now, actually, it's launched. Everybody can support influencers on Instagram by money. And I think it will be changed to digital coins soon. Another example, a tip jar and the methods that people can share money or even cash money with people or organizations. Yeah, that's it.